Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Flawed Theology podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Suzie, and we're asking the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Flawed Theology podcast. We're on a guest role, and it makes me feel like, hey, we're just kind of lazy and don't want to do topics, which is maybe partially true.
Well,
we do have a good topic coming.
It's a huge topic, very research heavy. So I feel like we needed the time.
Yeah, need a little more time. And I keep coming across people and I'm like, oh, I need to talk to that person. Our guest today is actually a friend of mine from Harrisonburg back in the day, who was a swim coach with my wife, because my wife is a longtime swimmer, and Diane is a swim coach you were the swim coach and you were the director of that swim team, right?
No, not really. I was just one of the coaches that was there the longest, and I managed the junior coaching program.
Okay, so that's what it was. I knew you were in charge of something. But anyway, I invited Diane to be on the show because she was ranting about something the other day, which I thought was hilarious. And I didn't realize that you had come from a churchy faith background and are now an atheist, or are a long-time atheist from your church background. So I thought it'd be cool to have you come on and share your story. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in general, your just general background, a little bit about who you are.
Okay. I'm heading rapidly toward my 60th birthday, so I have a long way to go back. But my family is actually from Scotland, and we moved to this country when I was small. We lived in New Jersey when we first got here, and we moved to Virginia because my brother is deaf, and he went to the Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind. And I was here through high school, and then after college, I moved to Richmond in Virginia for 7 years, and then I went to upstate New York for 3 years, and then I went down to Charlotte for 7. And then when my marriage ended, I brought my daughter back up here. It's been 18 years now, and I've been back in the area and started coaching the swim team because I had been a swimmer on that team when I was a kid, and my daughter was a water baby, so I got her involved in that and met some of the most amazing, wonderful people, and really felt like I belonged somewhere again after that, which was great. My daughter's all grown now. She graduated from UVA a couple of years ago, and she lives in Richmond. And I spent a lot of years in retail operations and then career services. And then I was a social worker for 9 years, which I loved, but was a really difficult job and did not pay very well. And now I work for the state, the state of Virginia, which I thought was going to be a very dull, kind of boring job. And it turned out to be the most fantastic job. I have so much fun at work. I absolutely love what I do. I love working for the state. It has some, things that aren't great about it, but I do love it. And then sort of going backwards, I was raised in the church. My family was not overtly religious. My parents were definitely believers. I grew up in a very, very conservative house, politically conservative. And as you know, Phil, now I am not that way. And that sort of is tied a little bit into my religious, path in a way. Anyway, my parents were believers. They felt like we needed Jesus, us kids, the three of us. Right. So the first church I remember going to was a Methodist church in New Jersey. That's where we lived when we first, came from Scotland. And then we switched to a small non-denominational church. And I don't have confirmation of this because my parents are both gone now, but I really believe that we switched to that church because they had a church van that used to come around on Sundays and take all the kids to Sunday school. So it meant my parents didn't have to go. Right. They felt we needed Jesus. They weren't so keen on it. So we did that for years. And then when we moved here, we lived in a little town in the county. Phil, you know the county, very conservative. And we started at a United Methodist church in that town. And it was lovely. It was a great church. And I did everything. I did all the churchy things. I say that I was indoctrinated, and people hate that word. But that is what it is. When you're a kid and you are taken to church and you are told, this is what we believe, that's indoctrination, pure and simple. And so I started at this church. I did, I did everything: Sunday school, church services, youth group, youth retreats, church camp, choir, bell choir. I mean, I did everything. And the truth is, I really liked it. I liked church. I liked the social aspect of it. I liked the fellowship that came with it. I enjoyed it. I had someone in a comment thread the other day tell me that I had obviously been hurt by church, by Christian. And I was like, no, I wasn't. I wasn't hurt at all. I really enjoyed my experience. What I couldn't deal with, I couldn't wrap my head around the whole concept of God. I really struggled with that from a very, very young age. I can remember being 7 and 8 and questioning my dad. When I was very small, it was about Bible stories that just didn't make sense to me. Like the Genesis story, the talking snake, the Noah's Ark story, completely ridiculous things, but they're presented like history, not like parables or like stories. And even at a really young age, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. It just didn't make sense to me. But when you are indoctrinated, when you are told this is how it is, that if you don't believe, you're going to go to hell, that's terrifying, very scary for a child or even a young person. And so you just sort of accept, whether you really feel comfortable with it or not, you just accept. So I was baptized and confirmed in the church. And then when I was about 16, I guess, something happened in my life. Like I said, I was raised in a very conservative home, and something happened that made me realize that about this particular issue, my parents were wrong. They were just flat out wrong. While I had never really had permission or felt comfortable with dissent, my dad was a very opinionated person, and his opinions were the right opinions. And you thought the way he did. And so I wasn't comfortable dissenting. But that realization that my parents were wrong, it changed the trajectory of my entire life. It opened my whole world up, and the way that I viewed the world, the way that I saw people in it especially, and the way I saw my parents' politics. I realized if they were wrong about this, they were wrong about other things as well. And what that did was allow me the ability to dissent where this whole God thing was concerned, where I started to realize that I had to find my own path. And for me, God just didn't feel real. And I couldn't, kind of wrap my head around any of it. It wasn't logical. It didn't make any sense to me. There were so many holes in all the stories. And every time I really questioned, I would get, that's, we can't really understand that. That's God's will. I'm like, okay, no, that's not good enough for me. So by the time I got to college, I was identifying as an atheist.
So the issue that you had at 16, was that like a personal thing that your parents were wrong about, or was it more of a political opinion that you... It was
a little bit of both. I met a boy. I met a boy who was Black.
Okay.
The most beautiful boy I'd ever met in my entire life. He, at that age, I was really awkward and uncomfortable, and I didn't feel good in my own skin. It was kids they don't blossom in high school, and I did not. And I met him, and I really liked him, and I knew that he really liked me. And I also knew that I couldn't go out with him because my parents would not approve, and they were very vocal about that. When he asked me out, I had to decide whether I was going to tell him the truth about the reason I couldn't go, or I was going to make something up. And I decided I owed him the truth. Mm-hmm. And I thought he would be angry, and he wasn't. He was just sad. And I remember thinking two things. One, I never wanted to cause that look on anybody's face ever again. And two, my parents were wrong. There was no reason that I should not be able to go out with this boy. And like I said, that just changed everything. It made me think, if they're wrong about this, what else are they wrong about? And even though it wasn't really directly tied, like I said, to religion or God or anything, because we weren't a house that spoke about religion. We didn't pray, say grace, things like that. It wasn't like that. It was part of that bigger package, that I could now say, I think you're wrong about this. I think you're wrong about this. I think you're wrong about this. And it just sort of got kind of lumped in, and I was able to just sort of walk away at that point. And, bear in mind, although my parents and my dad especially was very conservative and we were completely opposed in terms of a lot of the things we believed in. I adored my dad. I really did. And he adored me. And he did soften a lot of his views when he got older and when he died. And he actually, it's interesting. Like I said, when I was in college, I was an atheist. I consider myself an atheist. And I was sort of a militant atheist because you know how when you're 18, you know everything. And I knew there was no God. I knew it. I was positive of it. And that did soften a bit. And then because I learned what agnostic really was about. And so I consider myself an agnostic atheist now. I say I'm agnostic based on what I know, but I maintain that we are all agnostic because nobody knows for sure, but you can't tell a person of faith that they don't believe that at all. They know for sure, but they don't. So I'm agnostic based on what I know. I'm atheist based on what I believe. I don't believe. I can't believe. But as I got older and I sort of softened into that view, when my father got sick, I struggled with it because I knew at some point I was going to lose him. And then I got pregnant with my daughter and my dad died when I was pregnant, and I was devastated by his death. I really was. I was so desperate to believe that he was still with me, that he was watching, that he was somewhere, he was in a better place, all the things that you're told about heaven. And, I wanted so desperately to believe that. And so I was sort of grasping at things. And I kind of vacillated between the atheism, agnosticism, and okay, maybe there's something there. But over time, I realized I wasn't looking for God. I was looking for my dad. Mm-hmm. I wanted my dad. And when I finally accepted that, he's gone and he's not there anymore, then I was able to sort of settle back into my true belief, that there is no God. And I've been there ever since. I was 33 when my dad died. So 34 when I sort of came to that realization. And I've been there ever since. But I say I don't know. I'll never tell you that there is absolutely unequivocally no God because I don't know. But I can't imagine a situation where there is. And if there is, I don't believe for a second it's the Christian God.
No, absolutely not. 0% chance.
Yeah, because if there is a God and he's it, well, then he's really doing a pretty shitty job at what he's supposed to be doing. Like
the worst job imaginable. I say he's a narcissistic dick, and I was married to a narcissistic dick for 16 years. I do not want to spend eternity with one. So if he is the God, then I'm like, send me to hell. I do not want to be there. I'm fine with that. And I'll be in good company.
If we can go back to 16-year-old you again, like the fact of like kind of racism in your childhood or in your family, like I find that interesting, especially coming from like a Scottish background and then coming to the US. Like, was that something you knew about your parents, or like would they have overtly said that? 'Cause I kind of had a similar experience, except it didn't challenge my faith in God. I just thought my parents were idiots, and I also probably was like such a dorky teenager. There was no chance I was going to get with that girl anyway, so I was like, I'll just justify it away. But my family would say racist shit all the time, and I never knew that it was racist until now, looking back on it.
Yeah.
Is that how kind of what your experience was like?
Although my parents were both Scottish, my dad was raised in the US. Like I said, very, very politically conservative. I'm not going to say that all conservatives are racists. That's because I don't believe that's true. But I think most racists tend to be quite conservative.
Yeah. Right.
Again, I don't like to make blanket statements, but I think that just tends to be a fact. I mean, and the truth is we all, we all harbor those feelings or tendencies, or because it was learned. And even though you fight it, and I fight it on a regular basis, and I raised my daughter, to believe that we were all the same, even though we're different and diverse, which is wonderful. And so she has this incredible circle of friends that are diverse in every way possible. And so I feel like, I succeeded there. And her minor at school was African-American studies and gender studies. So she really took it to heart. And I have a wide circle of friends that are all very different. But my parents, bearing in mind that the UK at that time in the 50s and 60s was quite white, especially Scotland. The first person I met who was Black. I was 9. And in fact, we're still friends today. So I think that it was I've tried to sort of explain it, away. It was the era they were raised in. It was the place they were raised in. But in the end, it is what it is. They did have racist views. Now, my dad and my mom, I think their saving grace was, for me, that if you put a person in front of them, they treated everybody the same way. Everybody had a fair shake. But they would my dad especially would make sweeping generalizations about people that, used to bother me. And there were jokes sometimes made. And I was told that I would not be able to date outside of my race. I was told I would be disowned. Now, whether or not that was true, I don't know now. I don't think it was because, like I said, my dad adored me, but I believed it at that time. And I wound up marrying somebody who was actually Mexican. My daughter's brown. So in the end, I got them. But I used to call my dad Archie Bunker, affectionately.
Right.
And like I said, he gave everyone a fair shake. And I have friends who are Black that came to my house when I was young, and they always said they felt like my parents welcomed them with open arms, which is great because I don't really remember how they, treated people. But I have a niece who's my sister-in-law on my ex-husband's side, married a Black man, and my nieces are Black. And my parents, they welcomed her and accepted her. And so they, it wasn't like the Ku Klux Klan sort of racism, but it was definitely there.
And your parents, you said that they softened as they got older. What do you credit that to?
For my dad, I know, and he credited me with a lot of the change in his view. Now, my mother and I did not have a great relationship. She was disagreeable just to be disagreeable with me. I mean, that was just how she was. So she would have fought me. But at the same time, like I said, you put anybody in front of her and she would have treated them with respect and given them a fair shake. And again, that was my parents' saving grace, but they still harbored those sort of global views that so many people do, and that I've tried very, very hard not to espouse, and certainly not to pass on to my child.
Yeah. I was sort of getting chills earlier when you were telling your story, because it's so similar to mine, even down to your dad. Your dad sounds exactly like mine, but we're definitely at odds with politics and we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So growing up, you said you enjoyed church. I'm guessing nobody directly hurt you at church, and that was the same for me. But I feel like for me, there was some indirect hurt just based on the pressure to believe this doctrine. Do you feel like, looking back, do you have religious trauma because you were forced to believe something that you weren't convinced of?
I don't think so. And it's interesting that you use the word trauma, because I would have said I never experienced any trauma in my life. And my daughter and I, we are very close, and she's brilliant. I mean, she truly is. And she sat down with me one day and she was like, Mom, trauma's not like getting run over by a bus. Trauma can be those small sort of micro kinds of things that happen. And she goes, you definitely experienced trauma. And then she would list off some of the things that she felt. And I was like, okay, well, you're not wrong about that. But religiously, I don't really think I did. I think because on some level, even though I was kind of pushed in that direction, I don't think my parents did it intentionally with any sort of, I think they just wanted us to have that foundation, because they, like so many people, feel that it's a good thing. Religion's a good thing. Faith is a good thing. God's a good thing. And they just wanted us to have this good thing in our lives. But I never felt necessarily pushed to believe. I mean, I do feel like I was indoctrinated, and I felt like I had to believe it just because that's the way it was presented to me when I was young. But the truth is, I never really did believe. I accepted what I was told, because you do when you're a kid. But I never really fully believed. And when I came out told my parents that I didn't believe, that I was an atheist, my dad just was like, okay. He sort of accepted it. Now, my mother thought that she fully believed, I think until the day she died, that my choice to be an atheist, it's not really a choice, it just, that's what it is, was just to spite her. And I told her it really had nothing to do with her. It was just a perk that she hated it.
Right.
And that's honestly how I saw it. I loved that she hated it. So no, I don't feel like there was trauma.
Well, I didn't feel like I had trauma either until I had my first therapy appointment. And I was talking about my religious upbringing and how it affected me to present day. And she was like, I think we should spend a lot of time talking about your religious trauma. And I was like, I don't have religious trauma. What do you mean? Yeah.
Well, and I think the idea of religious trauma, when you hear the word trauma, you immediately think of like sexual assault, or you feel like, you see something violent. And I mean, the religious trauma syndrome as a diagnosis has only been around since like 2011. Most of us that grew up in the church and had by and large positive experiences would look back on it with some form of like affection and say, oh yeah, I had fun, I had friends, I had youth group. But that's not really what trauma is based around.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of trauma comes from being involved in a toxic environment. And probably the most traumatic thing that is at the root of religious trauma is the idea that you're a sinner and that you're destined for hell.
Yeah.
And especially in your formative years as a kid, you tell a kid you're not good on your own without God and you're going to hell. That's traumatizing. And you don't really realize that until later if you really dig into it and start to unpack it.
Yeah. I mean, fair enough. Yeah.
And I'm not saying you certainly do. I'm just like, I found the concept of religious trauma like really fascinating. And there's a book out there called Leaving the Fold by Marlene Winnell, who basically was the person who coined this phrase, religious trauma. And now it's in the DSM-5 and it's an actual diagnosable condition. It's a good resource if you ever want to kind of learn about it. But in general, I feel like we all have this unrecognized trauma and you don't realize it until it comes out in a weird situation where like you're having a problem making a decision and you're like, why can't I make this decision? I'm a smart, competent person. And then you realize, oh, it's because my whole life I've been told I have to trust God for my decisions. That's a trauma response. Like,
I never felt that.
Yeah, right.
No, I know what you mean.
That's an example. Yeah. Like there's all these different like symptoms, which I find fascinating because I was a psych major and, worked as a therapist and clinical kind of person. So I find it fascinating. But
well, I do follow a few people who are sort of deconstructing. I like that word. And there's one, if you don't follow her on Instagram, you should. Her name is Eve Was Framed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We follow her. She is brilliant.
Yes. I'm angling to get her on the show.
Oh my gosh. I just love her. I really do. I love that she articulates some things that have been rolling around in my head that I haven't been able to quite, get out. But I follow a few other people as well. And they do talk about their trauma. Yeah. The whole thing about going to hell if you don't believe that sticks with you. And and that's probably the thing I would say that most people who were raised in the church who don't believe, that's the thing that they have the hardest time leaving behind. Mm-hmm. That worry that, oh, what if I'm wrong? But again, it comes down to me. For me, it's if it doesn't make sense to me that a true, all-knowing, all-powerful, loving God would say, you can be the best person in the world, but if you don't believe me, you don't worship me, you're burning in hell for all eternity. That makes no sense to me. That's a human. And I say God was created in man's image. I believe that 100%, especially when your God supports all your political views and
dead giveaway.
Right. Yeah. When your God's white, gun-toting, and voting on the right side of the aisle.
Yeah.
Exactly. And but even the God in the Bible, I mean, which again, created by men, the Bible is written by men. He's horrible. He's horrible. I can't, not Jesus, I do separate the two. Jesus sounded like a pretty decent guy. I mean, I would have liked him, I think, if I'd met him. I don't know whether he really existed. There is supposedly some proof that he really did live, and maybe he did. Sounds like a pretty cool guy. And that was what I was ranting about, or not ranting, but what I had posted about the other day was I reposted a video, and it was about the fact that if Jesus lived today, a lot of the people who follow him would hate his guts.
Absolutely.
Hate his guts. I mean, he was a brown Jewish socialist. Right. And that is so far from what the white Christian nationalists worship today.
So you are similar to Suzie in that, like, you were skeptical and probably a very precocious child. Like, as you said, you were indoctrinated and you kind of went along with it because it's kind of what you do as a kid, which is kind of the very definition of indoctrination. You do something that you may or may not necessarily because it's your survival is dependent on it.
Right.
As an 8-year-old kid, your parents say you're going to church because it's my house, my rules. You don't have the ability to say, oh, wait, I want to think for myself, because you can't just go somewhere else for your food and shelter and sustenance and love and care. That by its very nature is, on the abusive end of the spectrum. Even if it's not physically abusive, it's mentally and emotionally abusive. What were some of the things as a young person, as a child, that you were like, this just doesn't sit right? And then like, how did you square those things?
I asked a lot of questions. I never got satisfactory answers from anyone. My dad tried. I remember asking him once. I was watching television and there was one of these commercials on for, I don't know what the organization was, like Feed the Children. And they would show these children in Africa, especially with the little bloated bellies, they were starving. And
yes.
And I remember asking how, if God is good, if God is powerful, if God can do these things, why does he allow these people to suffer this way? And the way my dad explained it to me, and it didn't have anything to do with church, because again, while my parents were believers, they were not religious. So the way my dad explained it to me was, and I'll never forget this, I was about 7, and he said, you have to think of the world as like a hamburger. And he said, when you have a hamburger, you need a bun. And when you get the bun, you have to have the top and the bottom. You don't get 2 tops, you don't get 2 bottoms. And I said, right. And he said, you have to think of the good things that happen in the world as the top of the bun, and the bad things that happen in the world as the bottom of the bun. You've got to have them both, but hopefully the good things are bigger, like the puffier part of the bun, than the bad things. And when I was 7, that made sense to me, but he didn't relate it to God. He just didn't mention God. And so he would come up with some answers that made sense well enough to me as a small child. The Genesis story about the talking snake I found ridiculous from a very young age. But then as I got a little bit older and I was like, okay, so Adam and Eve were the 2 people in the garden and the whole world was populated from those 2 people. Now, I knew just a little bit about biology at that point and a little bit about sex. And I was like, that just does not sound right to me.
Yeah. Something doesn't add
really
up there.
Concerning.
Yeah.
There was never an explanation for that.
And there still isn't. Like, it's really funny because like if you ask people about that, they will say, oh, there was other people around. It's like,
really?
Well, where are they? How come they're not mentioned? And like, and especially post, global flood. So even if you say there was other people around from Adam and Eve, which doesn't make any sense, after God killed everybody in the flood, all that was left was Noah and his 3 sons and their wives. So then everything came from those 8 people, which also doesn't make good genetic sense either. Like, so you're going to have some, genetic problems.
Not to mention the fact that they couldn't, the whole animal thing that I knew as a very, very young child, that's ludicrous. I've been to the zoo. I've seen how many animals there are. They did not fit on that ark.
Right.
They just didn't.
We always call that the problem of poop. That's my favorite. my favorite debunking of the ark story is like, well, where did all the poop go? Because
I think it also only had one window.
Right. One window.
The poop went into the Bible. That's where it went.
Right.
That's it. You solved it.
There it is. Yeah, like Ken Ham and those Answers in Genesis people, like, oh no, there was an elaborate sense of how they arranged the animals so the poop flowed down and blah, blah, blah. I'm like,
what?
Oh, you've never heard their explanation about the poop? It's ridiculous. And it's like, well, you kind of forgot about the methane because there's going to be a lot of off
right,
gassing.
with the one window.
Toxic
but see, they just
off-gassing.
make stuff up. They're always like, we only believe what's in the Bible. The Bible tells us exactly what we need to know. But then they just make stuff up and add it like they know this for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no description of a ventilation system or a poop transfer system anywhere in the Bible.
No.
That's so funny. So you have kind of like an interesting transition. Like you mentioned the word deconstruction, which now is like a big buzzword. And I think the general perception amongst a lot of churches and stuff is that deconstruction is only for like young millennials. And
that's not true.
You were like deconstructing before deconstruction was deconstruction. How did that transition to thinking on your own feel like if in those early years of kind of deconstructing your indoctrination?
It was very freeing, really. And like I said, even from that moment that I recognized that my parents were wrong, that was very freeing in and of itself, because I realized, although I still had to live in my parents' house, I had to live under their rules, I no longer had to subscribe to their belief system, to their theories. And whether I discussed that or not, and I did, because my dad, I could talk to my dad about things like that. Like we didn't talk about, very personal things, but we could talk about issues. And so I could say, well, I think this, or I don't understand why you think that. But it felt very freeing to be able to say that. And my dad, it's interesting because although my dad was very, like I said, very opinionated, and my brothers grew up thinking just like he did, I think he was proud on some level that I didn't, follow his path, that I found my own way. He didn't agree with me, but I think on some level he was proud of that. I've said so many times I wish that he had lived long enough to know Ryan, my daughter. Oh God, is she opinionated and brilliant. And she's on the complete opposite end of the spectrum from my dad. And she would have enlightened him in a lot of ways. And I think he would have loved her. So I wish that he could have known her. But yeah, I think it was very freeing. And I tried, like when I was raising her, I tried very hard. At first, I didn't indoctrinate her in any way, not in religion, not in politics, nothing. In fact, I said all the time, you can't believe what I believe just because I believe it. You have to find your own way. With religion, I always had books in the house. She had a library that rivaled some elementary schools' libraries. And so I had books about all the major religions. So, because I felt like it was important for her to know what they were. But I told her from the time she was quite young that whatever she wound up believing was fine with me, as long as she, really felt strongly about it. But that I did not want her to really explore until she was older, until she understood what she was committing to or what was happening. Because I was confirmed and baptized. I didn't know what any of that meant. Kids in Catholic schools they go through catechism and they go through their first communion, they have no clue what they are committing to. Kids that say the Pledge of Allegiance, that's indoctrination. Oh, God, at its purest form. They have no clue what pledging allegiance means. They just say it because they're taught.
Right.
So I didn't want that for her. And when she was a little bit older and wanted to go to, like, if she asked if she could go to church with her friends or go to youth group, I would say, sure, absolutely go. Because I wanted her to be exposed. But that was when she was a little bit older, and I knew that she had the ability to say, no, that doesn't sound right. When she was 8, she was in the county school system, and she came home with a piece of paper for weekday religious education. I don't know if when your kids were in school here, the city, I don't think offered it, but the county did. And I was like, what the hell is this? Because public schools, religious education. So I thought, okay, don't jump to conclusions. Maybe they're doing like a global religion study, which I would have been fine with, because it figures into our human history. Every war that's ever been fought is because of religion. So it's important that people understand, sort of what it is. So I would have been fine with that. That's not what it was. It was Sunday school. It was offered on Wednesday, and the way that they got around it was taking the kids off school premises to do it. I was fuming when I heard about it. I went to the school board, and I was very nicely told to sit down and shut up, that this was an optional program. It was offered across the state. They were not breaking any laws because the kids were not doing it on school premises. But I'm like, you're teaching to the SOLs. People are so stressed about their school day and how much time they have, and you're pulling kids out of school to teach them Sunday school. Oh, I was furious. And she did not go. She said at first she wanted to, and I said, okay, tell me why you want to go. And she was like, well, I don't know. And I said, do you want to go because you want to learn about the religion, or do you want to go because your friends are all going? And she said, well, because my friends are going. And I said, okay, then I'm going to say no. And I said, and here's the reason why, because they're going to tell you one thing is the right thing. And I don't want you to absorb that. She was 8, and she was too young. And I didn't want her to hear that and then feel pressured in any way. So I said, we're going to say no. And, when you're older, again, I want you to find your own path. And to be honest with you, at 25 now, almost 25, I don't know what she really believes, because it's not important enough to us to discuss it. I think she would probably label herself agnostic, leaning towards atheism. She definitely doesn't have anything to do with organized religion. She sees that as dangerous, as I do. But she didn't take my views because they were mine. She had the opportunity to find out on her own what she wanted when she got older. And nothing really stuck for her either. And so I feel like she's quite objective about it all. Same with politics. I would give her, because I was not given that opportunity. So I would say, here's this view, here's the merit in this one, here's the merit in this one, because all the views have, well, most views anyway, not all, especially today, have merit for the most part. But I'd say, here's why this person believes this, here's why I believe that. You have to figure out what you believe. So I never forced her into any sort of, and she's way more liberal than I am. And I think I'm pretty liberal. And I know it's not me, because she will spout things that I didn't even think of. I've never thought of. And she makes me look at things from different perspectives now. So I feel like I did a good job in that way. She was able to kind of figure out her path.
I think that the way you did it is the way that maybe we should strive to do it. I know when I first came out of religion, I was a little more angry, and I was like really protective of my kids. And I was telling them, if God's not real, the Bible's all made up. And I still believe that, obviously. But now I'm transitioning more to the approach that you need to decide this on your own when you're older. You cannot make these decisions now. Even today, my husband and I were talking about Trump, and my daughter just goes, "Oh, he's so stupid. I hate him." And I was like, wait a minute, you don't even know anything about him. She only said it because she's overheard me say this stuff.
Right.
So we told her, you can't have an opinion about politics right now. You have to wait until you're older and you actually understand the issues. And don't just have a view because mommy or daddy has the same view.
Right.
Well, it's the whole idea of like that parenting in general needs to be about teaching and giving kids the permission to think and teaching them how to think as opposed to what to think. And that's what I think is like the biggest difference between like how we were all raised. Your parents basically told you what to think, and then they gave you a whole battery of reasons why you should think that, but they never gave you the opportunity to say, well, here's what other people think and why.
Right.
Now it's so unique to have a perspective when you have a child come to you about something and you're like, instead of telling them what you believe about it, say, well, what do you think about it? And just see what they say.
Yep.
And you can do that safely when it's not something that is going to certainly harm them.
Right.
There's some times where I'd be like, okay, well, that's just plain wrong. And here's why. And you should probably agree because it's kind of a safety issue, or, there's some common sense there. But like, it's hard for me. Like my youngest is in a Christian preschool, like a Methodist preschool. And it's very innocuous. Like they don't really push the religion thing. But, when they do the programs and stuff, they sing various and sundry triggering Bible songs. And I just have to kind of like bite my finger. My 5-year-old the other day in the car said something about Jesus. She goes, yeah, and Jesus is real. He is. And I was like, all right, well, some people think that. And she's like, okay. And that was it, but she's 5 and I know she'll forget about it. I have to kind of just let it roll. And that's very difficult for me because I'm like,
yeah, you have a lot of self-control.
Everything pisses me off about religion and all this kind of stuff. Like I coach a travel soccer team and I got a lot of Christian parents and kids on the team. 2 weeks ago, one of the coaches came to me and said, hey, my kid wants to do a prayer thing before the game with the kids that want to do it. It's just optional, blah, blah. And I lead it immediately. I'm like, bite your tongue, bite your tongue, bite your tongue. And I'm like, that'd probably be okay. I didn't really think anything of it. And I was like, and he goes, okay, I'm going to send a message out on the team chat. And I was like, my alarm whistles were going off. Well, anyway, it turned into a whole thing. And it turns out I got the board involved and they didn't wind up doing it. But like my wife was like, you shouldn't say anything about it because it's going to cause whatever. But I let the religious people cause the division because the board had to tell them, hey, you can't do that on the field or whatever. But now it instantly divided my team, and that's the thing I find so frustrating about religion and politics too. It's like, you can't believe what you believe or think what you think about politics. It's an instant dividing line.
It is. But I think so much of that is about core values. I could disagree with people about whether this should happen or that should happen, or we should be taxed on this or that. That's easy. But what's happened lately is that the candidates, some of them are so vile in their views, what they spout. I feel like my integrity is being attacked. And there's no way that someone who will vote, we'll say Trump, someone who could vote for Trump, comfortably vote for Trump, say, yeah, I support him. Absolutely. That person cannot share my values in any way, shape, or form. And they are probably not someone that I want as a part of my daily life.
Right.
Now, am I going to be, well, online, sometimes I am a little hateful, I have to admit that. not proud of that, but it happens. But face to face, I'm not going to be hateful to somebody for that, but I'm also not going to go out of my way to be friends with them either.
Yeah.
And I think it's just become, it's become so polarizing. But a lot of that too is what the media does. I mean, they're working hard to divide us, I think.
Yeah.
I think when you get a group of people together, you can come to some common ground if you can get past that initial ugliness.
Yeah. Like if you meet someone and you kind of hit it off with that person and they're cool and they share, let's say they are into swimming or they're into, whatever hobbies that you're into, and then you find out that they're religious. Do you find that difficult to square?
No, not in general. Some of my very best, closest friends are very devout in their faith. But they're the people that I say walk the walk. There are a lot of Christians out there, and I always put quotation marks around them. They claim to be, but they are as far from the teachings of Christ as you can possibly get. But I have so many people in my life who are quite devout in their faith, and they walk the walk. And again, I am agnostic. I don't believe, but I don't know. So I can't wrap my head around how they believe. I respect the fact that they believe. I respect the way they live their lives. I respect their faith. Sometimes I wish I had it. Honestly, if I had somebody who would forgive me for all the shit that I have done in my life, because I don't forgive myself, I will tell you that would be amazing. And if I thought there truly was a place that I could spend eternity in, this very happy little garden with butterflies and everything, oh my God, that would be wonderful. I would love that. I would love to believe that. I can't, but I would love to. So sometimes I envy them, and when people say, oh, just give it all to God, I wish I could, because I was a single mother for the last 18 years. I did not make enough money. I struggled. I've been in survival mode for so long. I'm just now getting to the point where I'm comfortable and doing well, but it took me a really long time. And if I could have given that shit to God, let me tell you, I would have.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you could have given it to him and he would have given you something back, would have been even better. Like,
Yeah.
There's a lot of people giving shit to God. And he's like, thanks. And you keep carrying it too while you give it to him. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only time I have an issue, and it has happened, is when people have tried to convert me or force me into their belief system. And I put the kibosh on that immediately. I went out with somebody once when I first started doing the whole online dating thing. This was years ago. And I used to wear a cross, a Celtic cross. Like I said, I was born in Scotland. I bought this in Scotland. And Celtic crosses predate Christianity. They're, as every Christian symbol, holiday, everything is, co-opted from paganism and other, belief systems. So this cross, it had a claddagh wrapped around it, the heart, hands, and crown. And I loved it. And I wore it. So anyway, I went out with this person who it turned out was Catholic. I don't care. That's fine. Half my family's Catholic. It didn't bother me. And he seemed to be okay with the fact that I was an atheist. We're all good. But then I think it was our second date, he said, I'm really glad you wear that cross. And I said, why? And he said, well, because when you meet my family, they're going to assume that you're religious. And I said, okay, that's not necessarily a good thing. I said, you do realize that when people make that assumption, they tend to ask questions. They want to know what church I go to, where I, belong. I said, I will not lie. I'm not ashamed of my beliefs in any way, shape, or form. And that won't go over very well. And I said, well, then I think maybe this should be our last date.
I like how on the second date he was assuming you were going to meet his family already. Like, let's not be too presumptuous there, buddy.
Well,
like...
he had some issues. So yeah, there have been times when I have been rejected in that way, but it tends not to bother me. I mean, it would be really hard, I think, for an atheist to only allow atheists into their lives, because there are a lot of us, but we're not that easy to find. It takes.
Well, it's because you're not wearing a freaking atheist symbol on you, so
exactly.
You're not out proselytizing to tell people not to believe in God or whatever, because you're just living your life like a normal human being. And it sounds like you're describing like the Christians that live the life or walk the walk are the people that, like, I feel like, in my opinion, these are people that are like genuinely decent people.
Absolutely.
And live as good human beings. And it's not necessarily because of their faith or their religion. So it doesn't kind of interfere with the relationship that you could have with them.
I have been told by a number of people, by a number, like 3 people, have told me that I am a better Christian than most Christians, which 1 makes me laugh and 2 makes me sad.
Right.
I also refer to myself as a humanist. And as you all know, I know a humanist is a person who can be good without God, who believes that people can be good without God. And you're good without the promise of eternal salvation or eternal damnation. You just are good because it's the right thing to do. You're a decent person.
Right.
So yeah, so my friends, even the friends who are religious, I would say are probably humanists as well. They don't believe you have to have God to be good. They are just decent people, and would be good even if they found out there was no God tomorrow. It wouldn't change them, I think. You know, I'm really fortunate in that I'm surrounded by, I truly, truly do have the most amazing people in my life and who accept me for who I am regardless. And not everyone has done that. Not even my family has done that always, but my people do.
Right. Was your ex-husband, I don't want to dig too much into this because, you know, I know you like to talk shit. Was he religious? Was there any factors there in your marriage that were part of why the marriage didn't last or whatever? Or was that just pure incompatibility? Like,
well, it was the fact that he was sleeping with another woman. That's really
that'll do it.
Yeah, I mean,
but that did.
So
it.
he could have been a youth pastor somewhere, is what you're saying. No, I'm just kidding. Seems to be a trend, but
it's funny. I mean, he wasn't religious at all. He was Catholic, just kind of by default. But it was really interesting because when we got married, his aunt came to the wedding and she had 2 teenagers at that time. I think they were either 16 and 17 or 17 and 18. And they had each had a baby. And the daughters didn't come to the wedding, but his aunt and uncle brought the babies to the wedding, the 2 of them. And I made a comment just about how I thought it was just amazing that there were 2 kids in this family who both had babies, you know, as teenagers. And he said, well, you know, Catholics don't believe in birth control. And I said, Catholics also don't believe in premarital sex. Don't pick and choose your Bible shit.
Yeah.
And that was probably the last time he ever said anything to me about religion. But we had a funny situation that happened when she was 3. And I put her in a preschool that happened to be held in a church. It was not a religious preschool, but it was in a church. So I went to pick her up one day, and the teacher, who was an older lady, was standing at the door waiting for me. And she had this look on her face. And I'm like, oh, shit, what happened? Either Ryan did something or I did something. I don't know what it was. And I said, well, what's wrong? And she said, well, Ryan announced to the entire class today that Barney is the Antichrist. And I just burst out laughing. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't know she was listening. And she said, wow, little pitchers have big ears. I took her out of preschool. And I always say that I took her out of that preschool because I felt like anybody teaching my child had to have a better sense of humor and less religion.
Right.
Yeah.
This two did. And it did not go over well. No, he was not religious. It didn't have any bearing. He was a narcissist, and I shouldn't have married him. And I probably knew that on some level at that time. So many of my friends, you know, knew and unfortunately didn't tell me. I wish they had. I might have rethought it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you asked earlier if I had any bad experience, I did have one situation. It was quite interesting, actually. My dad, when I was about 13, my dad was working away from home, and it was down near the beach, and we went down there for a couple of weeks to spend with him, so that he didn't have to drive home, you know, and see us on the weekends. We all played with the kids in the neighborhood, and there was a girl who was about my age, and we became friends, and she asked if I wanted to go to church with her. So I said I would go. We went to the Sunday school class at first, and the Sunday school teacher sort of honed in on me as, you know, fresh meat and asked me all sorts of questions.
Yes, another soul to save.
Well, and that was it. She asked me, one, if I had been born again, which was not a term that I recognized at that time. I didn't really know it. So I was like, no. And then so she said, so you haven't been saved? And I was like, no. I mean, if she'd said, have you been baptized and confirmed? I would have said, yeah, I knew what that was. Right. But I didn't really understand this. And she said, oh, well, you know, you need to be saved. If you're not saved and you die, you will go to hell. And I was like, okay. So they're really pushing that whole fear factor. So we go to the church service after Sunday school. And get this, the minister, the pastor of the church, I think it was a Southern Baptist church. I'm not 100% sure. I don't really remember it, but it was very loud. It was very different from anything that I had known. But the pastor's name was James Bond.
Here we go.
He wore a 3-piece white polyester suit like John Travolta wore in Saturday Night Fever. So he's up there and he is doing his thing. He's preaching and he's loud. And I'm just kind of like, whoo, okay, this is weird. So then he asks for people to come up to be saved. And one of the kids from my Sunday school class just treks on up there and he's crying. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so weird. And the Sunday school teacher comes and she sits down beside me and she says, you need to go up there. And I just went, no, I do not. And she said, no, you do. You need to go up there. And I said, no, I don't. I'll wait and get back to my own church and do this, which of course I had no intention of doing. And she said, well, if you are driving home and you get into an accident and you die, you will go to hell. And I just went, my mom's a really good driver. I was like, I am not going up there. And finally she left me alone. But I was like, that was the worst experience that I had in a church.
That's like so pushy. Like, yeah.
I love that response. That's like such a innocent, childlike response.
My mom's a really good driver.
Yes.
That's great.
I did not know what to say. It was, and then later when I realized what she meant, like by being born again and being saved. I mean, like I said, I've been confirmed, I've been baptized. I got that. I realized what that meant. I probably
that's the difference between like Methodism and evangelicalism,
right.
But yeah, evangelicals of any kind are like, oh yeah, if you died tonight right now, are you sure you'd wake up in the presence of God? Well, thanks for scaring the shit out of me. I'm 13.
Exactly. Like, it was frightening. And
yeah,
I'm surprised you had the courage to say, no, I'm not doing that. Like to an adult.
Well, I don't think it was so much courage. It was fear of getting up in front of people and looking weird. And I was not about to do that. So yeah, I was not going.
Yeah.
I feel like at that age, I was just doing whatever adults told me to do. And if somebody told me to go up, that was an adult, I would have done it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, not in this case. It was just too bizarre. It was too different. My parents weren't there. Maybe if my parents had told me I had to do it, I might have. I don't know.
Yeah.
But definitely not a stranger who didn't know me at all. There was no way.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like your exit from like religion was more about like being old enough to know that you could think on your own and you had permission to think on your own. You weren't under the umbrella of your parents anymore. And then you were like, oh, I never believed this anyway. And now I don't have to.
Right.
Maybe some people don't have such a easy, graceful transition out.
Oh, no. Well, like I said, I follow a lot of those pages and people talk a lot about, how do you come out to people and tell them you're an atheist? And I'm like, I just tell them. I don't have any problem with it. I just say it. And some people are like, really? Like, why is that a big shock?
It's funny.
To me, it's no big deal. But it's been because I've been this way forever and ever. And I've never been, like I said, I've never been ashamed of it. I've never been embarrassed by it. I don't feel the need to defend it. I used to argue about it with people. I don't feel the need to do that. And I always say, look, here's the deal. Brilliant minds for millennia have debated the existence of God. And no one has ever come up with a definitive answer. No one has ever been able to say, yes, there's proof or absolute proof that there is not. Not that you have to prove that there's not something,
right.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I would say, you and I are not going to solve this problem. I'm not going to argue with you about it. You can believe what you believe. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to believe what I believe. It's all good. And we don't have to be at odds as a result of it. But if people want to talk, I'll talk. I have no problem with saying how I feel. Sometimes if I'm not even asked, I'll say it. It is interesting, especially when I've met people that I know are quite religious, people who are Christians, they automatically make the assumption that everybody is one.
Mm-hmm.
And then they talk about it like it's no big deal, like everybody should be feeling this way. And then, then you have to decide, do I say something? And sometimes I don't, it depends. And sometimes I do. And I always enjoy looking at their faces when I do say it, oh, well, I'm an atheist. You are?
Yeah.
Like, it's always a shock. It's always a big surprise to people.
Yeah. I love it, especially when you'll do something good and people are like, you must really have the spirit or God is really working through you. And you're like, well, no, actually, it's because I'm an atheist and I just think that there are good things to do. And then they're like, how could you be moral without God? It's impossible, What's
so interesting is I have a fair number of atheists in my circles, and every one of them has an incredibly strong moral compass. And I have met a whole lot of Christians that don't have any morals at all, or that compass is so broken that it's not funny. And I did a piece. I have a blog that I started, gosh, I don't know, 15 years ago, 16 years ago. And I did a piece on being an atheist. And I started out something about we kill puppies and kick babies and stuff like that. And then, I was like, okay, no, that's not what we do. And I just explained it from a very practical sort of standpoint. And I got a lot of response, to it. And so I do kind of like to dispel some of the myths. I mean, I've had people call me like a Satan lover. And I'm like, okay, you clearly don't get it. If I don't believe in God, I don't believe in Satan either.
Right.
So no, it's the opposite of God is not necessarily Satan. It's no God. That's the opposite.
Right.
But it's sometimes people, they get things in their heads and they don't fully understand what it means. It's just a lack of belief. It's not a belief system. It's not a religion. It's just a lack of belief. And the fact is, they all don't believe in any other gods but one. I just believe in one fewer God than they do.
For someone who's questioning now, like what is some advice that you would have for someone who's questioning, their beliefs?
I mean, I would say go with your gut and trust your gut. For me, that's what it was about. My gut told me this didn't make any sense. My head told me that as well. I think it's so important to think critically, to look at things from a logical perspective. If something doesn't make sense, then ask about it. And if the response doesn't make sense, and usually they didn't for me, then you're a little closer to trusting your gut.
Did you ever go into like the academic side of it, where you looked at maybe how the Bible was put together or all the contradictions, the scholars, what they had to say about it? Or did you mainly just trust your gut, as in like, I just don't believe this, I don't feel it?
When I was younger, I did. I did quite a lot of studying about it. I took some theology classes. When I went to churches, different churches, I asked questions because I always find it so interesting that, especially in Christianity, they all use the same doctrine. They all use the same book, and no one interprets it the same way. Right. Everyone has a different view. And you know what? I'm sorry. A God that really wants people to worship him would have been a little more clear, in my opinion. A little more clear and given a little more evidence. So I did. I asked questions, but I remember just feeling like, no, that does not fly. No, I don't get that. And I could poke holes in every answer I got. And I can't stand it's God's will. It's not for us to understand. No, I'm asking because I want to understand. And if I don't understand, then I can't wrap my head around this. So give me something I can understand.
Right.
And it's not for us to understand. Okay, well then I don't understand it, so I don't believe it. Because I think that's such a cop-out sort of answer.
Yeah,
it is. And I hate it.
Yeah, it's an easy way to explain away the contradictions. You just say, "Oh, well, just trust God, and He has a bigger plan." I hate that His ways are higher than our ways. Response to everything that drives me just up a wall. I'm like, no, they're not.
And like the whole, prayer thing. The people say, lift so and so up in prayer. And when that person, because they're sick or whatever, that person recovers and, God healed that person, that it's wonderful what prayer can do. Well, when prayer doesn't heal that person and that person dies, then it's God's will that that person died. Well, okay, God had the power to heal this person, chose not to. That's kind of a dick move. But okay, so then you're saying it was God's will that the person died. So it was obviously God's will that the other person lived. So why'd you bother praying about it? But you didn't pray hard enough for the person that died.
Right.
To me, none of that makes any sense. And nobody has ever been able to explain prayer to me in a way that makes sense. I get why people do it. It makes you feel like you're doing something when you can't do anything. When you can't fix something, you pray about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But don't tell me that praying is going to, fix whatever is wrong. I have cancer. I was diagnosed with cancer 11 years ago. It's a chronic form of cancer. And while mine is likely not going to kill me, it could at some point. It always hangs over me. But I spend a lot of time at the cancer center. I have a port that I have to get flushed on a regular basis, treatment sometimes. And I've seen a lot of horrific things. People who are near death when they're there and people who don't come back. And I know people who have lost children to cancer. And, those people cared, they prayed, and it still happens. But I get so frustrated with, prayer heals, prayer solves problems, prayer does this, it does that. And then this happens and it was God's will. Like, that's a cop-out. That's an absolute cop-out. It doesn't do anything. And there isn't anybody paying attention. And if there was, and he could fix it and he chooses not to, then he's an asshole.
Yeah.
Or he can't fix it and he's not what you think he is. Either way, he's not the God that's portrayed. He's not a loving God. He's an awful God. And it doesn't value life in any way. I've never seen evidence that the God of the Bible values life in any way.
And the Christian response to that is he made us, he gave us life, so he has the right to take it whenever he wants. But if that's true, then that means that we don't have to value each other's lives. I can murder you and it doesn't matter because God doesn't value your life. We're all going to the afterlife anyway. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters.
Yeah.
And if all the bad shit that happens, like children dying of cancer or whatever, the other explanation is like, oh, there's a lesson to be learned there. Like that seems like a pretty mean and shitty way to teach somebody a lesson. If you as a human father or mother, would you want to teach your kid a lesson that way? And now, unfortunately, some of these parents, that is how they want to teach lessons, What's
the lesson? I read an article not long ago about a 1-year-old baby, a little girl who was raped repeatedly by her uncle and father. And then she died. She had been tortured her whole first year of life. And then she died because they were tossing her in the air and off the ceiling until her skull fractured. And then she hit the floor. Anyway, she died from that trauma. What lesson is to be learned in that? That child suffered every single day of her life. She was a year old. She had done nothing.
That's sickening.
Yes, her father and her uncle deserve the absolute worst that could possibly happen to them. But how can an all-knowing, all-powerful, loving God allow something like that child to suffer her entire life? And God knows what's going to happen. He knew they were going to do that when that child was born. So why was she born? And I'm going to say this, and I want to preface this by saying, although I have never experienced a miscarriage, I know a lot of people have, and it's a devastating, devastating thing. And I cannot imagine anyone who loses a child. So please know, I'm not making light in any way, shape, or form of miscarriage. It's a horrible, horrible thing. But every time it happens, you will hear people say, well, it was God's will that it happened, and even the person who experiences it sometimes, because they're trying to find a way to justify this awful thing that's happened to them. I get that. I truly, truly do. But here's the deal. The people who are advocating for banning abortions completely across the board, there are thousands and millions, I suppose, of miscarriages every year. Nothing she's done wrong has caused it. They're devastating, painful, but they're called spontaneous abortions.
Right.
So God has the ability to prevent them, chooses not to, allows that mother and father and family to suffer incredibly. That's a God that does not value life. And abortion is not really mentioned in the Bible. A fetus is referred to as property in the Bible. Why are we so... I get why people are concerned about abortion. I get why they don't want it. But using religion as a way to prevent women from getting the care that they need, want, deserve, whatever, to me is just vile, especially in a situation where, again, please, I'm not making light in any way, shape, or form of miscarriages because it's awful. But if you're going to attribute them to God, that's a God that doesn't value life.
Right.
I don't attribute them to God. I believe they're simply biological things that happen. But the people who do, I don't understand how you can, in the same breath, oppose abortion. Like I said, it's not logical to me. It just doesn't make any sense.
I think most people agree that people dying is bad. So, if you are believing in a God that doesn't value life, that's damaging.
But that's not, you won't find a Christian who says that, though. No. God loves us and gave his son for us. And yes, he values life. I'm like, what? Show me, because I'm not seeing it. And there are so many examples in the Bible where he did not value life, where he just wiped out an entire civilization because he got pissed at people because they behaved badly. But you know what? He knew they were going to behave badly when he put them here because he's all knowing.
Right.
So basically he just watched what he already knew was going to happen and then got mad about it.
Yeah. which he knew he was going to get mad about too. Like you brought up my favorite thing, we call it the triomni paradox, or there's an Epicurean paradox. Like there's no way that God can be all loving, all knowing, and all powerful. It's impossible.
This has been me for such a long time that I don't feel the need to really explain it anymore, or justify it to anybody. I figure I don't ask religious people to justify their beliefs. Mm-hmm. I don't feel the need to justify mine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think you make a really good point as like a kind of almost like an ultimate goal for like people who are in the deconstruction process. Like, look, it's possible to get to the place where you literally don't think about this shit anymore.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I want to be able to drive past a church and not feel this wave of bitterness come over me. Then I know I've made it.
Yeah.
Actually, I like church. I like old churches. I don't like new ones. You could burn those all to the ground. I wouldn't care. I love old churches.
Like cathedrals and stuff like that.
Yeah, or just little old, like I spent a lot of time in the UK, and just the little old stone churches. But the St. Paul's Cathedral, you bring that. It's interesting. Somebody told me that there is a phenomena that's related to the architecture of St. Paul's Cathedral, but I go in there every time and I'm reduced to tears. It's really, really interesting. It's not about God. It's not about that. And like I said, a friend of mine, and I wish I could remember exactly what he said, but he told me there's something about the architecture in that building that affects people on a sort of an odd level. It's the only cathedral I've ever been in that does that to me, but I get very emotional. But I think a lot of it is also about the history too. It happens to me when I go to Edinburgh Castle in Scotland. I will stand there and then just imagine the people that have crossed that threshold, that path that I'm standing on, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So a lot of it is the history, I think. But I love old churches. I love stained glass, not the Bible pictures in stained glass, but the like the rose windows, and I think they're just beautiful. And so I quite like that. They don't bother me. I hate those the big mega churches. I hate those. I think they're just vile and disgusting. And the people who run them and drive away in their Mercedes and
their private jets. But
Yeah, there are a lot of things about religion that make me angry. So it's not a situation where I just am like, I don't care. I care. I get very frustrated, but it's about the harm that I think it does. And I can see the harm being done that's tangible. That it bothers me, makes me angry. It's such an interesting thing. Like I would say, it's a part of who I am, but it's not all of who I am, and it's not the most important part of who I am. I don't think it's just part of me. Not a big deal.
Yeah,
that's what I wish for everybody who wants to get away from it, is that they feel that way eventually.
Yeah,
it's just not a big deal, and they don't care anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's just like nice to have the permission to just be human, and that's it. And there's a huge freedom in that. So you're a really cool like example of that, like just being free to be your own self, which is something we all want. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners would be like, I can't wait to get to that point. So I think that'll be really encouraging for people to be like, look, it's possible,
Yeah, it is. It is possible.
Well, let's wrap this up. We really appreciate you giving us so much time and sharing so much of your story. It was awesome to have you on. So
yeah, thank you for talking with us.
Thanks for being here, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Flawed Theology podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Suzie. Tune in next time, where we will continue to tackle the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
Be sure to join us on our Facebook group, Dangerous Questions, and follow us at flawedtheologypodcast.com. Subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Rate and review the podcast on Google, Spotify, Apple. Those reviews are really cool, and we like to hear from them. So until next time, keep asking the dangerous questions.
See you next time.